Welcome, everyone. We're so excited that you're able to come today to the Future of Health, presented by Chicago Innovation and Matter. And as we all know, there's nothing more important than our health is. And while I hope that each of you are happy, healthy, and terrific, my guess is that, like me, some of you may feel a little anxious and restless. That we're getting close, though, to the turning point to be able to really reach the point where the medical profession and our innovators can really come together. And that's why I'd really like to thank our panelists today, who really are at the intersection of health and innovation and all of the great work that they've done. You know, my youngest son is a doctor at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And as I've told him and other medical professionals, people, you really make a difference and have really had an impact on shaping our future health. Well, for this great panel today, I'd like to introduce a wonderful moderator. Her name is Holly Copeland. She is the Senior Director of Corporate Social Responsibility, Sustainability, and Impact for Horizon Therapeutics. Horizon was just recently named by People Magazine a top 50 company that cares. Isn't that just such a wonderful description? Horizon Therapeutics is also a sponsor of the Chicago Student Invention Convention and the Women's Mentoring Co-op. And Holly is a Chicago Innovation Board member and such a great friend. Please welcome Holly Copeland.
Thank you, Tom. That's quite an introduction, and I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm hopeful that today's conversation will inform and inspire. Before I get started with introducing our esteemed panelists, I'd be remiss in not acknowledging that today's conversation about the future of health is happening on the one-year anniversary of the World Health Organization declaring COVID-19 a global pandemic. With the increased vaccination rates and decreases in COVID cases, it certainly seems timely to be having this conversation about what our future looks like. Our first panelist and partner of today's panel is Steve Collins, the CEO of Matter. Steve oversees the city's most prominent healthcare technology incubator and innovation center with hundreds of startups and corporate partners. Rick Long is the head of innovation at Cigna, where he leads innovation for this 160+ billion health services company with more than 180 million customer and patient relationships. Rick Yates is the Senior Vice President of Pharmacy and Healthcare with Walgreens, who is presenting today's panel. Rick is at the forefront of Walgreens' response to how COVID-19 has redefined the role of pharmacy and accelerated the adoption of new technology in healthcare. Nicole Leiter is the Senior Vice President, Emerging Pharmacy Channel at McKesson. She is a global leader in healthcare supply chain management solutions, retail pharmacy, community oncology, specialty care, and healthcare information solutions. And our final panelist is Dev Singh. He is the CEO of Aero Digital Labs, which was recently selected to the 2021 Forbes Next 1000 Startups list. Aero accelerates digital adoptions in healthcare, pharma, and the life sciences. Thank you and welcome to our panelists. Now that you've all been properly introduced, let's take a moment to hear from our audience prior to jumping into questions. Can those of you watching reply to the poll that you should all see on your screens now, which lists or should list a question? Have you engaged with a telehealth service provider over the last year? We'll give everyone a moment to go ahead and reply, submit their responses. I know for myself, the answer is yes, and had that question been asked pre-COVID, the answer would have been no. So certainly a lot of changes in my personal healthcare journey, as I'm sure many of you have had as well. So if you could take a moment to give a reply. All right. And let's see here. So it looks like about 66% of you are like myself and have in fact engaged with a telehealth service provider over the last year. 34% no, 0%, I'm not sure, which is probably good because you should know if you engage with a telehealth professional. So it looks like many of us are having a similar shared experience over this last year. So now let's get started with our first question. And maybe we could get started with you, Steve. We seem to be on the cusp of game-changing innovations in health, with advancements in gene therapies and nanotechnology, for example. What do you consider the most exciting new frontier in health and medicine?
Well, thanks, Holly, and thanks, Chicago Innovation. And by the way, Luke, you looked great, and you were like really enthusiastic. We were feeling you, and I'm sorry we couldn't hear you, but we were right there with you the whole way. I think the next 20 years are going to be like truly revolutionary when it comes to healthcare. I mean, the changes that we've seen wrought with mobile technology and the internet over the last 20 years, I think we're going to see a similar scale of change when it comes to health and healthcare over the next 20 years. And you named a couple of things around nanotechnology and gene therapies, and there's microbiome and cell therapy. There's all sorts of technologies like that are really starting to emerge out of labs and have really truly incredible potential. One of the ones that I'm kind of most excited about is really when we talk about analytics and the ability to like change the whole model of healthcare from it being very reactive today and pretty bad at managing chronic conditions and very episodic. And that technology, by enabling us to capture data from people in real time or near real time in lots of different non-intrusive ways, whether they're in a clinical setting or out of a clinical setting and just enjoying their lives, and being able to flip the model and make it very predictive, so that instead of going to see a doctor when you have a symptom or you feel funny or somebody tells you look funny, that the doctor will come to you because some parameters aren't working quite the way that they should be, and some alarm is going to go off, and a doctor's office is going to call and say, let's take a look at XYZ. And I think that can and will represent a sea change in how we manage well-being and how we manage chronic conditions. Has huge implications for costs and health and longevity and everything else. And I'm couldn't be more excited about that as a development.
Certainly share that excitement. I think I read somewhere recently that the value of data has now exceeded that of gold and oil. So it seems like we're on the precipice of understanding that there is value, but not really understanding how to quite harness that for change yet. And that's that exciting moment that we find ourselves in. Would any of the other panelists like to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I'd jump in there, and I actually would agree with Steve on the analytics front. I think it's this ability to predict, but I think the it's also going to help us a lot with the efficacy of treatments, right? We're going to be able to understand a whole lot more about what treatments really yield the best results. And so couple that with earlier engagement and better predictive models, and then being able to put people down more effective paths, I think is really going to make a huge difference.
Absolutely. So Dev, we might pivot over to you with a question. What are some of the biggest impediments to innovation in healthcare, and how do we overcome these?
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. Let me begin by saying that, we are all, we're proud of the American dominance in the innovation in areas like, pharma, R&D, life sciences, biotech, drug discovery techniques, gene therapy, med devices innovation, etc. If we start thinking of sectors other than that, like, care administration, care coordination, payers, we see a bit of tapering down, a little bit of substandard patient experience, and maybe a population health outcome that's suboptimal. Several reasons come to mind. There are systemic reasons. Macro factors like socioeconomic divide or government regulations that drive some of this hesitation. But I guess more importantly, we all need to own up a little bit of responsibility there. There are factors inherent within our organizations that lead to this sort of fence-sitter attitude towards innovation. The reasons could be many. There could be lack of executive will to take risks. Sometimes there's lack of funding internally. Sometimes it's just a matter of lack of in-house talent, or focus, or just budgets. Traditionally, I mean, not all, but most of our healthcare providers have allowed themselves to equate innovation with risk. And as a result of that mindset, any innovation is treated with too much caution, with the great excuse of, let's not mend it if it's not broken. You can take many, many examples from many other industries who have believed in exactly the opposite and are reaping the benefits thereof. So I believe that in the current scenario, the tech-led innovation has to be seen specifically on the care administration side of things, as a direct enabler of improved health outcome for the population, for the patient. Until the time our stakeholder organizations and governments see that link, we will perhaps, unfortunately, have to continue to deal with some of the challenges that we see across our nation.
It's a fair point, and I feel like the development of Matter and Steve's role in kind of building this bridge between the startup community and some of our corporate entities that might be a bit more hesitant to embrace innovation, as you've described, is a really nice place or platform to see if we can help inject some innovation in the work that's being done at the corporate level. Do any of our other panelists want to jump in on that? What other thoughts on impediments to innovation in healthcare, and maybe some ideas around how we can overcome these?
Yeah, this is Rick, and I'd love to jump in, because I think a lot of it goes back to, I think, what Steve and Rick were talking about as well. Part of it still is data, right? So data is an impediment right now because it's not readily shared. I think there's regulations behind it. I think the more data we have to really impact that. So I won't beat that one since you guys talked through that. Second one I'd say is regulations, right? So we still are a highly regulated industry, and I think there are a lot of things that are really causing challenges for us to really innovate and go at speed the way that we want to. You think about pharmacy in general, we've got federal regulations, state regulations, board of pharmacies, just lots of things that are really impeding us from accelerating the way that we want. That's very different by state, by geography as well. And the last one I would say is payment models, right? We still have a payment model system that is set in the distribution model for dispensing medication versus really going after patient care outcomes in the way that we all want to go to as well. So I think those are the three in my mind that really hold us back and are kind of hindering us from an innovation perspective. And I wish I had answers to all of them. I don't know that I have solutions to actually say this is how we actually solve them all. So.
You read my mind. That was my next question is, well, how do we overcome those challenges? Very good.
That's why we have Rick Long and others on here to help us think through it from a payment model perspective, right? Yeah, so.
That was your cue, Rick. You want to jump in? Do you have the solutions for us that we're all looking for?
Yeah, not quite. We're trying, but I was concurring with Rick. One of the things I had written down was, right now we have, a lot of misaligned incentives throughout the kind of whole healthcare process and the whole healthcare system. And so, payment models, I think, would do a lot on that front. But I think, and it also actually ties to some of the regulations too. But until we get, that alignment better straightened out, I think we're going to be, it will continue to be tough. I think the other impediment is just the sheer complexity of the healthcare system, right? It is very fragmented and not very well integrated. And, even to the point where, we don't even have, personal health records, right? And we don't even know actually how they had to give everybody something other than a piece of paper to tell that you've had a vaccine for, a pandemic. So it's like, when that's our resort for something like that, you just understand that the complexity is enormous in this industry.
Just right for opportunities for innovation.
Absolutely.
So Nicole, we might pivot over to you for the next question. For the average person, if you didn't know about telehealth before the events of the past year, you probably do now. Have you been surprised at how quickly telehealth services have been adopted? And do you see us moving more in this direction, even as we come out of the pandemic?
So thank you, and hello to everyone. Thank you for having me. I will say, so I used telehealth before the pandemic, but I think, now to the point, this has become very, very commonplace. And so I would not say that I'm surprised by the adaptation of the consumer or the patient behavior. I think that if you look at other industries, which I think Dev mentioned earlier, other industries have innovated and made us very comfortable using mobile devices or other technology for very secure transactions, right? So you could think about the banking industry as one example. So from a consumer point of view, I'm not surprised, and I absolutely see it continuing. The one comment that I would make, which is a little bit, maybe tagging on to what Rick said, is the complexity and the regulations. And I think the obstacles that we actually put on ourselves as the industry, I think has been really eye-opening. And as everybody has come together in this pandemic to remove those hurdles, I think is why we saw things move so quickly. So my hope is that we take all of those learnings as healthcare professionals and in the industry, work together to overcome what is the art of the possible that meets the consumer's demands.
It's interesting that you state that. Like it seems unlikely that we could go exactly back to how things were before, knowing now that some things are possible that we didn't previously think were possible. So it sounds like that's kind of your thoughts too, is just that there's going to be this sort of new normal that kind of integrates elements of the past, but also what we've adapted with here in the present.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that to be true.
Would any of our other panelists like to hop in?
Yeah, Holly, I actually have been surprised not by the rapid uptake of telehealth that we saw, but by how much that's come down in over the recent months. So it went from, like, we talked to different health systems. It went from, in most places, maybe Kaiser being an exception and a few others, but in most places it went from kind of an anomaly to the prevalent way that they were delivering care, obviously, and just thousands of % increase in telehealth visits, generally regarded as positive. Like, all of the data that I've seen at least suggests that people kind of liked it, and they didn't have to go anywhere, and it's come down. And so we all knew that it would come down as the world sort of started to normalize and things started to open up, and hospitals and health systems sort of relaxed non-elective procedures and visits and everything like that. It's actually come down more than I thought it would. And it makes me wonder kind of where exactly we're going to settle out over time. And some of it obviously depends on reimbursement and what Rick's company and others are going to do around payment, Rick Long, and are going to do around payments and things. But it's been really interesting, and I don't think we've seen the end of the kind of. I don't think we've seen a stabilization yet, and I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Was there a driver in the data with doctors, or was that driven largely from patients, or is it we just are seeing the trend and not really understanding what's driving it yet?
Well, so doctors' offices in many cases were just closed for a while, and hospitals were closed for a while, and so you couldn't go in person, and so basically everything moved to telehealth. As mostly, I think you can go see your doctor now if you want to, and so I give the latest numbers. It's like 80% of people are doing that, and so maybe there will be certain areas where it'll become more prevalent, or I'm sure Rick has a lot of data around this, and it would also have a view, but yeah.
Yep. Well, Rick, there has been a lot of attention and discussion centered around mental health in the wake of the pandemic as well. What changes are you seeing on the part of health insurance providers in reaction to this? And how will this influence healthcare innovation moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think that, one of the things that we've been emphasizing now for a couple of years has been the notion of the marriage between and the interplay between mental health and physical health, and how they really are. It's really difficult to pull those apart, even though we've treated them completely separately in the medical system for forever, basically, certainly for the last 50 years. And so I think what you're going to continue to see is the notion that, a healthy person behaviorally helps them be healthy physically, and continue to understand that interplay. One of the things that has plagued the behavioral health space recently has been just the networks are very fragmented. You don't have these kind of huge practices, and so there's frankly been an availability issue when people have wanted to have it. And so I know we've greatly increased our network, even actually before last year when everything when it really hit us, and so getting bigger networks has been important. And actually this question of telehealth, right? And so, we went from like 1% of our behavioral visits being telehealth to 60% of our behavioral visits being telehealth over the last year. And so, and I think that's something that is, I think that'll stick, right? I think that'll continue to stick. And the other really interesting thing that's going on in space, which is really, for this forum is very interesting, is that there are so many, because this space is really kind of growing and burgeoning, there's a lot of startups and a lot of tech that's jumping into this space to fill solutions that providers and medical providers just haven't done yet. And so, for payers, we're having to figure out, how to integrate all of these different programs into our suite, and how we make it not just, going to behaviorists, but also, a lot of these other kind of digital solutions at the same time. It's very exciting.
Just a follow-up question on that too, as far as access to health. I know sometimes in rural areas, there just aren't mental health providers within, 50, 100-mile radius. And are you seeing changes in individuals in those geographic areas accessing mental health or behavioral health in a way that they just hadn't before because of the ability to telehealth?
Yeah, certainly as you get different modes and different channels like telehealth, but there's also, things like Talkspace, right? Where you can do asynchronous back and forth. And I think all of those, getting different modes and mediums out there is helping areas like that. I think what we're also finding, and it's not just a behavioral issue, but it's also a medical issue, that in some of these rural areas, there's stigma to overcome too. And there's getting people comfortable with presenting themselves and engaging. And that's something we spend a lot of time working on, is just that initial engagement of individuals, especially outside of kind of big, easy to get to areas.
And
I could see that being
sorry, Holly, and if I can just add, I think that if you look at how, not just telehealth, but just the broader ecosystem should be working to support this. I think, we've done a lot of things, like we've trained pharmacists in mental health awareness, and I think what we're trying to do is we're not going to be the solve for it, but we can help navigate, and we can help them understand options and how to steer into it. We did outreaches to senior members to, do wellness checks early in the pandemic, just to make sure they're doing okay, because I think we've got to look end to end to say, how do we actually support what Rick Long was saying, was understanding how do I start to engage, but we have to help educate and navigate in different ways as well. And I think there's just lots of different ways that the profession can really support there as well.
Yeah.
Sounds like taking a more holistic approach and addressing the whole health of individuals that we're working with, patients that we're working with.
Absolutely.
Nicole, maybe we could pivot over to you. You've spent a significant part of your career innovating the customer experience in pharmacy. What direction do you see this moving? And can you paint a picture of what the customer experience would or should look like in the future?
Yes, I'd be happy. Something I'm very passionate about, actually. And I think actually it's been coming through in some of the conversations so far on the panel, just to think about, like, there's three things: complexity, accessibility, transparency. And right now, in specific to the pharmacy space, it's not all connected. And even if it is connected, maybe you don't have visibility to it. And so I really think where we are headed and where we have to head is to a place where we can get comfortable with being very transparent and unlocking and empowering the patients to take, to kind of guide their own way for whatever is best for their health and well-being. And so this is going to sound oversimplified, but I really believe it is, you need to meet the patients where they want, give them, what they want and when they need it, and however that needs to come to life. And so I tend to think pretty far out and think, you're having an asthma attack and a drone drops off an inhaler, right? So how do we, or we think differently about folks that are living and maybe they don't have transportation, right? And maybe they don't have the ability to get to the care that they need. How do we bring that to them in certain places? And so really starting to think about things and curate offerings that are customer driven and not just industry driven. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. I've worked, in the industry for 25 years. And so I really think it is about meeting the patients where they need us, which will ultimately lead to, better accessibility. And hopefully if Rick can fix the affordability, that would be great. That'd be even better.
One of the challenges I think that comes to light when Nicole talks about you're having an asthma attack and a drone drops off an inhaler for you is that almost every part of healthcare has been architected and designed as a B2B experience. And the customer, the patient, the person hasn't not been historically at the center of how that experience is designed. And that there is a huge potential to change that and evolve that over time. It is changing and evolving, but it's hard because you've got a lot of large established companies, a lot of big systems, as Nicole and others have mentioned, it's just extraordinarily complex. But the more innovation can take us towards an orientation of more of a B2C experience, the more we're going to get things like drones that drop off asthma inhalers when you're all of a sudden having an asthma attack.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, currently I'm up in the mountains skiing with my family and I forgot my son's inhaler. And I thought, wouldn't that be nice if I could just push a button and it could just show up by the ski lift and I wouldn't have to worry? I'm not quite there yet, but I'm hopeful.
Well, I remember a cartoon from a couple of decades ago, the Jetsons, where that seemed so futuristic that you could push a button and some product would materialize, but it sounds like it might be not too far off in our distant future. So now it's time for our second audience poll. So a question should be popping up on the screen for everyone. And if you could just give us a response. The question is, how has the remote work lifestyle affected your health? So is that a positive change, negative, perhaps you're indifferent, that the change hasn't affected you at all, although I suspect if you're in the Chicagoland area, the lack of commute has had some kind of impact on your life for better or worse. So we'll give everyone just a moment to reply. And then I believe the results will be visible here in a moment so we can see. Looks like 47% have said that this has had a positive impact on their health, 32% negative, and then 21% indifferent. So a little bit more split than you would have thought. All right, so now let's go to you, Dev. I'm curious, what is driving new technology implementation in healthcare? Is it the demands of the consumer or a push for efficiencies on the part of healthcare providers?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you for naming the patient as actually consumer. So it's about time that the patient starts being seen as one. See, technology like cloud, analytics, IoT, even RPA or AI, they've been, some of them have been around for a while and they're mature enough, economically viable enough, but healthcare has traditionally not been very quick to adopt. And let's take an example from another industry. I think Nicole was talking about banking, right? If you deposit one bank's check into another, the bank number two is not going to ask you to go back to bank number one, get the cash out and deposit, right? They simply just do all the check processing in the background. There's a clearinghouse. It's 99.99% automated for decades. Take the same example. Why? I mean, I wonder, why do I need to carry a CD of my own MRI from U Chicago to, if I want to see another doctor at Rush University? Point I'm trying to make is that, technology has been there for a while. Something in the healthcare sector has helped us back from applying it to make the patient experience seamless. And consequently, this has made the system a lot more complicated and inefficient than it needs to be. So yes, to your question, whether it was consumer demands or push for efficiencies in part of the healthcare providers, I guess whatever the right answer is, it's about time that healthcare went digital. And guess what? A shock like COVID, as unfortunate as it is, just made digital much more important than it has ever been for healthcare. It just seems that everybody in healthcare is all digital woke now. In the last 6 months, I feel that the speed of adoption has accelerated a lot more than any other industry, perhaps because everyone else is already there. There's so many examples of application of AI and patient experience, or RPA and back office efficiency gains, or home at health solution, which I know Rick spoke at length about. Med devices, your wearables, all of them have all of a sudden gained a lot of prominence. And I really feel that it's about time that healthcare beats all the other industries, by the way, and not just adopting, but actually accelerating and getting ahead of the demands that the consumer is putting in front of us.
Fair point. Any other panelists' thoughts on that topic?
I would just say I could not agree more. So ditto.
Very good. The ultimate validation, Deb. Very good. Well, so this question will go back to you, Deb, and then also I'd love to hear from Rick Gates on this as well. If and when we encounter another global pandemic, how will emerging technology best be leveraged to quickly vaccinate the world?
Vaccinate the world. So, hey, so
no small feat.
Tall order. See, this entire vaccine to vaccinated value chain, this comprises hundreds of countries, thousands of organizations. They need to effectively play this game well. It's truly a battle of speed, accuracy, and collaboration. The challenge is to deliver 10+ billion doses across, hundreds of countries, right? Now, there's many aspects of this chain that emerging tech, such as artificial intelligence or RPA or IoT, can really accelerate. I can think of one example. All these different stakeholders in the chain, the producers and suppliers of raw materials, drugs, vaccines, ancillary products, PPP equipment, all of them, they need to collaborate, not just to produce, but to also create inventories and stockpiles so that they can effectively meet demands. This is not, hopefully, I really wish and pray that this is the last ever virus that we're gonna encounter, but chances are we're not. So there will be another one and another one, right? So you have to be able to create a value chain that is sustainable and fast and accurate, right? And reliable. Technologies such as AI-infused RPA, for example, can really help create all these different bridges, data bridges. We spoke at length about data earlier in the session. Create all these bridges between all these different parties that have not been traditionally talking to each other or are not used to. And within those bridges, you can create quick and accurate flow of data where none existed in the past. And not only this will help in the flow of data, but also create transparency across the chain. So you will know when you will get vaccinated, where, how, etc. I mean, for God's sake, for the last, I don't know, 3 weeks, I've been trying to figure out for me and my family where can I get registered? And there's just no availability, and no availability. That's it. So, technology can help, absolutely.
certainly. And I guess the flip side of that too, I might say, I have some older family members who have never used a device, a technology device. Theirs is like the rotary phone, and it was a second aunt in this case, and she said she and her friends, they're struggling with where to go and how to navigate and how to keep checking. So even if there is an opportunity, it can be challenging for some to kind of access what is available, what technology is available. Rick, do you have any additional thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would just say, first of all, Deb, I hate to tell you, there's going to be another pandemic. So, it's not a fact of if it will, but I think we learned through all the different pandemics that are happening, and I think there's different uniquenesses to each. So if you look back to H1N1 when it was here, we didn't have the digital forward world that we're in today, and I think what we do today and how we kind of partner and bring things together to really solve challenges is very different than where we were before. So how I look at it is, it's a baton race. Is how I look at it, Deb. You were saying the same thing, but you have all the way from manufacturing all the way to getting the vaccine in the hands of pharmacists that can give a shot. And so you have to look across that entire chain to understand where can you actually impact through innovation, ways to either modernize, accelerate, or innovate to where we're going as well. But we don't know when that's going to happen. It could be 10 years down the road. It could be 20 years down the road. So you can't plan for all of it. And I think a lot of it comes down to partnership. I think what you've seen or what I've seen through this pandemic, and I was at Walgreens during the H1N1 as well, is people have come together and leveraged others with expertise very differently than we did before. If you look at, challenges with getting vaccines in underserved areas, us leaning on the Uber as an example to say that you guys help with transportation, we'll help with the provider side of it, but we can bring things together to really accelerate care. You look at the digital side of it right now, I think we're all learning that the standard scheduling system is not what we need long term, and we're going to have to all invest in different ways of really helping people manage their healthcare going forward in ways that are going to be much more effective. So I think it's going to be a lot of partnership, a lot of really forward thinking, and I think we've got to still continue this evolution that we have of its speed and acceleration, and I think we've seen that through COVID, and I think we kind of lost some of that acceleration over time, and I think if we continue to move forward, I think we're going to be in a much better place going forward.
Very fair. Rick, I think we'll stay with you for the next question. When Walgreens stepped up to the call from the federal government to roll out the COVID vaccine, you also took on the complex logistical issues that accompany that task. One concern that became quickly apparent was the issue of vaccine equity. What have you learned so far about how to practice equitable distribution of a vaccine?
First of all, we are absolutely committed to equitable access to vaccines across all Americans. And so if you think about where this started, it started with the most vulnerable and where the highest mortality rates were occurring, and that was in long-term care facilities. And then if you look, the next most vulnerable populations were in underserved communities, sometimes Black and brown communities as well. And I think a lot of work had to be done to really understand what were the gaps, what were the challenges, and how do we just come together to really solve those types of challenges. And so we did take a step back and say, our job is really to help educate, and our job is to help vaccinate. And so what we've done is really hold together what we consider our vaccine task force, or equity task force. And it's really focused on 3 different areas, because how we look at it is access is one of the challenges, right? One, that we may be in 9,100 locations across America, but we're not in every community. And so you can't just expect everybody to be able to come into a pharmacy, to a hospital, or wherever it's going to be. We've got to take a vaccine to them as well. So there's a lot of work being done to really work locally. And when I say local, I mean hyper local, to understand where we're not getting care, and then how do we partner in that unique community to really solve the gaps that may be there. So a lot of work being done with access to really make sure that not only it's there, but we can also take it into those communities as well. Second, you hear a lot about hesitancy, and it's good to hear more recent reports or that hesitancy is starting to lift a little bit. And I think people are becoming more willing to get vaccine, but I think there's still a lot of hesitancy that's out there, and education and information is critical for us to really start to share effectiveness, where we're going and how we can really ensure that it's the right vaccine for the right individuals. So Pharmacy can't be the only place for that. So, we are a trusted profession, but we've got to work with local communities, whether it's going to be, Chicago Urban League in Chicago or in Atlanta. We may be working with church groups as well. You've got to really understand that local place of where healthcare really intersects, and how do we really, impact and influence that as well. And the third, I talked about a little bit before, it's a lot about partnerships, right? So how do you really understand where the gaps are and the challenges are to solve for them? The CDC has come out and said in Black and brown communities, one of the biggest reasons that they're having a lack of vaccines is going to be two things. One is hesitancy that we talked about, and the other is transportation. So we've gone out to really find a partnership with transportation, which is Uber, who is committed to 10 million rides that are either free or reduced fares for those that actually have transportation issues to get vaccines. And so what we're doing is really trying to say, how do we bring those solutions so that we can actually help impact and improve vaccine rates in all communities that we do serve. So that's kind of how we're approaching those going forward as well.
It's such a creative partnership with Uber to help address this kind of larger issue that's kind of beyond Walgreens' purview, but it's just a really creative solution for the community.
Well, and Holly, I'll just add on that. I'm sorry, I should just add on that real quick. It's fascinating. We have clinics that are happening in Atlanta tomorrow, so you'll hear about them tomorrow. But we have 3 churches that we're doing vaccinations in. One church, we've been using Uber because that's how they wanted us to help support them. And of the 2,000 vaccines that they're going to give, over 1,800 individuals said that they were interested in trying to get Uber ride because transportation is a challenge. So I think it goes to show you that we've got to really look out there and say, how do we partner to really have a bigger impact?
Absolutely. And taking that holistic mentality, right? Not just focusing on the vaccine itself, but holistically, how can we get people there and bought into the idea? That's great. Steve, we seem to be in a new age of healthcare advancement where cross-sector collaboration is driving innovation. What are some examples of collaborations that you've seen in your work at Matter that could be indicative of the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, for us, collaboration is just like baked into our DNA. And I think, if you're a healthcare company, healthcare organization, and you aren't collaborating cross-sector, then you're in big trouble. And I think that there are a couple of reasons for that. One is something we talked about earlier, which is around payment models and the evolution of payment models, and really this slow-ish but movement towards value-based care, and a switch towards a system where healthcare payments are based on value that's created, not activities that are performed. The only way to really do that is through collaborations. The only way to figure out a different way to share risk is through collaboration. So whether that's between pharma companies and insurance companies, or providers and pharma and insurance and PBMs, and there are a lot of different models that we've seen that are enabling different risk sharing arrangements in one way or another. We've seen Livongo as an example. They've changed they've sort of a trendsetter in a pricing model so that employers don't pay for all of their employees, only the ones that are using the services, and there's a risk share component built into that. We've seen pharma, as you're no doubt familiar, pharma and insurance collaborations where there are certain kinds of drugs where pharma companies effectively don't get paid unless the drug actually works for the person. One of our member companies is doing something very similar in collaboration with health systems and medical device manufacturers. So they enable risk sharing so that those two can come together, and they have the technology that powers it. So there's risk sharing based on the clinical performance of those medical devices. Second, and just as important, is that big companies inherently can't innovate fast enough to keep up with the evolving potential of emerging technologies. It's just large organizations, in order to function very well as a large organization, there are things that you have to have in place that make it just inherently very difficult to innovate at the same rate and the same speed with which a small entrepreneurial company can do it. And the opportunities there on both sides of that equation are just tremendous, because the entrepreneurs really can't know exactly how to position and develop and evolve their products unless they're getting input from large established players. And the bigger companies can really benefit from the speed and the nimbleness of entrepreneurs. And so we've seen a ton of really exciting collaborations along that vein. And I hope that we're going to see a lot more, because we really see that as a path to much faster and much more efficient development and adoption of new technologies that can really improve health and healthcare, both from an outcomes perspective and from an economic perspective.
So it sounds like we really need an eagerness from all parties to kind of come together and figure out ways to collaborate for better outcomes for everyone, all of the various actors in the ecosystem. So we're running up on time, so I want to close out with this final question and address this to all of our panelists, so we make sure we have time for Q&A at the end. So let's imagine that it's the year 2030. What is a major advancement in healthcare you hope we have achieved at this time? And maybe we could start with you, Steve.
True value-based care, where the incentives are between pharma, PBM, pharmacy, provider, doctor, and patient are all aligned in a beautiful continuum where everybody benefits economically when health is improved.
Great. Rick Long?
Yeah, well, that and I think the consumers and customers and patients really having a much bigger role in their choices around healthcare, better transparency, better understanding of where they can get healthcare, what they can engage in to do to be best with their health. So really that rise of their ability to influence it.
Great. And Nicole?
Yeah, so in addition to everything that they have already said, I actually almost think I would boil it down to one word, which is just equity. And I mean that in the term of, equitable accessibility, affordability, so that we truly can improve the overall health of all of our customers and patients that we serve throughout the world, frankly. And I think we have a ways to go there, but hopeful that we can get there.
Dev?
That and I believe that the whole drug development cycle will be leaping big time with the advent of this small and lesser known technology today called quantum computing. It is yet to be sort of commercialized. It's not yet economically viable. There's only a few computers in the world right now. 10 years from now, I do believe it has the potential to transform every single thing that we do across all sectors, not just healthcare. If AI enabled us to develop this vaccine in 12 months, quantum computing could have done it maybe in a few days. And if anybody wants to know more, just Google.
Excellent. And then Rick Gates.
Save the best for last, right? I'm just kidding. It's a combination, quite honestly, what everybody said. It comes down to fully integrated healthcare, right? And it's got to be at risk. It's got to be value-based, the way that we've always talked about it. But I think just as importantly, it goes back to the consumer, right? So it's got to be access to care in their neighborhood, in all neighborhoods, and at their fingertips. So it's that combination of both digital and physical, but it's convenient to what consumers are looking for.
Great. All right, thank you for that. And I want to thank all of our panelists today for sharing their perspectives on the future of health. And now I'm gonna briefly take a peek at the chat to see if we have audience questions. If you do have a question and you have not submitted it yet to the chat, please go ahead and do so. Here's a question for any of the panelists, maybe one could jump in. The government has had such a hard time with coordinating the vaccines. I see a huge contribution that could have come from healthcare companies. Was that offered and the government said no?
I mean, I can only answer it this way. They came and asked us to help with a certain portion of it, and we said yes. I don't know that anybody went to them and they said no. So I can only answer on the other end of it because we were on the other end of the ask to support. So.
All right. Here's another audience question. Let's see. How does the portability of health data and health records advancing? Is this helping providers and supporting consumers?
It is, but there's a long way to go, I guess is how I'd answer that. I think, you know, we still live in a world where there are not standards, and it's really fragmented, the different formats and different places this get in. And so it is, like you said, you have to wander around with your information as opposed to it being, you know, ubiquitous in the background. And so it's advancing, but not at a rate I think that any of us would like to see it move forward.
You know, just to kind of add to that, Holly, if I can, what Rick said, there's technologies right there. Like, you know, I see another question around blockchain that can really enable interoperability, security, compliance, everything put together. The only way we've been able to make sense of blockchain so far is cryptocurrency, right? Now, does healthcare have a use there? I think EHR, portability, and PHR, absolutely, that's a beautiful use case. Someone somewhere must already been working on it. I can tell you that. And and I'm sure Steve with Matter, you deal with hundreds of startups. I'm sure that there is somebody out there who's already coming up with something cool.
All right, and here's another question from the audience. How do we deal with the issue of misaligned incentives that have historically prevented faster progress?
Well, there's a lot of what we're trying to do now is do it through contracting and do it through collaborations. That'll get us some of the way there. I think there's inevitably regulations come in and impact this space, and I just think at some point that the cost, the increasing costs are going to put so much back pressure on the system that it's going to drive a change. It's amazing that it hasn't happened yet, but most players in the system, it's in their best interest to have this, to be able to crack that cost code, and so I think it's inevitable, but it's going to have a number of things kind of line up, I think.
And I'll jump in once more. I heard a story from China. In China, the doctors were incented to keep the patients out of the hospital. And the day we will be able to measure how many days in a year we are able to keep a family out of care effectively, healthily, is the day when everybody is going to line up behind that cause. That's my very simplistic view in life, but I guess if the regulators are listening, they may want to start bringing up some policies to that effect.
All right, and I think we have time for one more question. Rush did an amazing job doing the vaccines. I'm still amazed that so many other hospitals don't seem to be ready. Why not? Anyone want to jump in and take that one? I know.
I don't think I know what Rush did in particular to do something different than others, but I think that what it goes to is there's very unequal approaches across all the states in different ways by which they applied vaccinations. And so I could give you a litany of health systems that did a great job, but I think there's others that seem to go a bit slower. So I would love to know what Rush did as well, because I think there's learnings that could come from that too.
Great.
Yeah, I mean,
All right.
it's a tough problem, right? And there's no playbook, right? And so, and everyone was having to make decisions really quickly. And I think some people got it right, and others, didn't get it as right. And so, in some cases, it's not necessarily that people weren't trying. It's just that they made they made less optimal calls when they had to.
Which is understandable, just given we're all in new terrain right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to know.
Yeah.
So I apologize. I know there are more questions in the chat, but we are at time, and we want to be respectful of the commitment that we made for this to be an hour-long program. I suspect the Chicago Innovation team will document those questions, and we'll be able to have someone respond to you so you can get an answer. And so with that, I'd like to again thank our panelists today. This is a really intriguing conversation about the future of health, and certainly an important dialogue. And now I would like to hand things back over to Tom to close out today's event.
Thanks, Holly. And Holly, thank you so much for moderating this excellent panel. And a big thank you to Nicole and Deb and Stephen and our pair of brilliant Ricks. We really do value your great insights. I got to tell you one thing I'm just so gosh darn excited to hear. And that is that maybe we can indeed think about the patient as the protagonist in the future of our healthcare play. And I think that'll just be a pivotal moment and a great one for all of us to experience. Thank you all for all of you listening in today. We value each and every one of you, and of course our sponsors too. And we'd like to also let you know that on March 23rd is our next Chicago Innovation event, which is called The Future of Sports. And we've got some amazing people lined up for that one, which will be really great to hear how they're transforming and using innovation in the sports industry. So please get vaccinated, take care of yourselves, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thanks so much.